Good morning. I want to get on here and do a quick video update for you guys on kind of 243. The date where we're thinking it's going to go into effect and things to kind of think about. And so I'll let you guys kind of jump in here. Thanks for tuning in. I hope you guys are having a good day. Just been doing some videos, and so I want to do another one just to kind of get everybody up to speed when it comes to 243. And so I've seen a lot of questions and not knowing kind of what it looks like, and so I want to kind of paint the picture for you guys. Let me share this, and we will get started. All right, so what we're looking at is Senate Bill 243. They so effectively they took away the emergency clause, which is great for us because that means this thing is not going to go into effect the moment it was signed by the governor. And so that's a good thing for us. That's one thing that we have going for us, right? The only thing probably. But in regards to like prosecution, right? So it's something where we have to be aware that roughly September 26th is when we're thinking this thing's going to go into effect. And so that's going to be the restriction on the rapid fire devices, right? And there is some criminal penalties there, so we have to be aware of that. So obviously, it's a felony for any kind of transfer, manufacture, possession, right? And then there's the actual, if I'm in caught with the possession, it's a class A misdemeanor. So there's two different charges depending on what kind of situation you find yourself in. So that's something we have to be aware of. Also, after September 26th, that's when these different municipalities from around the state can actually start creating different policies when it comes to concealed carry. So that's where we're going to have to be really kind of mindful of what's happening in our local areas, right? So the best way for us to kind of stop this stuff is we have to be active. We have to weigh in. We have to make sure that we're watching what our school boards are going to be doing. We have to be watching what our water districts are going to be doing. And so typically are the counties, right? So there's so many of these different balls that are in the air that we're juggling that we have to kind of be aware of. And so I think this is part of the advocacy work that we do and the activist work is we have to hold these people accountable, and we do that by making sure that we are involved in the process. And I know it's not necessarily the most fun thing for us to do, but it's like it falls in the Oregon legislature this year for 243. Everybody talked about they want to give local control to local municipalities, and that was the big push. And so I think it was all a front, a facade. And so that's where we have to look at who we elect locally are going to be really the ones that are going to help preserve and protect our rights. And so that's something that we have to be really mindful: who's running for city councils, who's running for the county seats, who's running for the state legislature. So now is a time to really be paying attention and be active, and make sure that your voices are heard, right? Because the only way we can stop this stuff and make sure bad policy doesn't go further is making sure that we're paying attention. I know it's hard to do, and it's not something we want to do. Typically, depending on the situation, is how I believe city councils have public meetings once a month, depending on where you're at. The county board of commissioners, that's another meeting you're going to have to keep an eye on. And so that's just part of this process. We have to be really mindful of what's happening, because if we're not, that's when all of these things are going to actually, they're going to enact these policies, and that's where all of us are going to be get in trouble. And it's criminal penalties. So I'm going to share my screen real quick. Give me 1 second, and I'm going to show what this looks like for you guys, so you guys can be aware. And so give me 1 second. I'm going to. So this is the bill, the final bill, and this is when it's enrolled like that. That means it's the final form of the bill. This thing has changed. There was probably up to 22 different amendments, and so this is the final. It's going to the governor for her signature, which I believe she's already signed this into law. And so it's going to be 91 days from the signing. So we're thinking it's going to be around September 26th. Okay. So let's look at the penalties. So unlawful transport, manufacture, transfer, a rapid fire activator, that's going to be a class B felony. Okay. So something to be aware of there, something that you have currently in your safe. The moment it leaves your safe after this thing goes into effect, if you're stopped by law enforcement, they check your gun, they see it's got a rapid fire device, you're now looking at class B felony. Okay. For something you currently own that you could buy legally under state or federal law. So just something to be aware. So possession, if I am caught with in possession of this, it's actually a class A misdemeanor. And so something to be aware. So these are both ways for them to restrict or take away your gun rights. So this is it's all by attrition, right? So it's death by 1,000 paper cuts is what it is. So just something to think about. They talk about all these different machine guns. They talk about machine guns like we can't have machine guns in the state of Oregon. That's not the case. If I'm licensed under with the ATF, I can have a machine gun, and so that's something that I push back on that. There's a lot of misinformation regarding that. And they always, they talk about the bump stocks, that's already been challenged. There's all this stuff is going to be challenged, right? So this is something that we have going for us is this is all in our favor just because there's pretty good precedent, and this is going to be challenged at the Supreme Court level. So that's something that we should just be kind of patient, and all this stuff is going to get thrown out. That's kind of my thought, and it's just going to take time to do. So, and so the next part, this one's the one that I really am not a fan of just because it makes all of us vulnerable, right? So that's the public area restrictions, okay? And so this is where they can change their policy. So this is a class C felony, which is already part of law. If I carry a gun into a courtroom, that's already a felony. It's already part of law. I don't know why we're adding more to it. And so this is where they can restrict, right? So possession of firearm at school property. And that's another thing that we have to be mindful is now these school boards can restrict your rights. They can make they can make the schools a gun-free zone. We can argue that that's not going to make anything safer for Oregonians. And the hardest part for me, it's a class C felony, right? So you have a law-abiding citizen that's exercising their right. They're law-abiding for the most part because obviously they're law-abiding until they get to this point. They go up on the school grounds. Now they could be a potential felon without them knowing. And so that's where we have to be watching our school boards. What kind of policies are they going to be implementing? And so that's something to think about, when we have the highlighted section right here, that's the newest changes of what they did. And so this is where they changed ORS 166.377. And so that's the Oregon Revised Statute that they made updates when it comes to public buildings. And so this talks about where they have to put the signs. That's this. I don't know if it says the size of the sign, indicating affirmative defense. Okay, so yeah, so that's something to think about. 100% Norman. That's a really great comment. And there's been other parts of the country where sensitive places have already been argued. There's been Hawaii, there's been Illinois, there's been New York. And so I feel like a lot of the stuff that the Oregon legislature is doing they're doing it just because they can, and they're doing it because they want to get sued because they know as Oregon gun owners, we don't like to file lawsuits. And so that's why some of the stuff that they do is it very much could be unconstitutional. And so just something to think about there. And so that's the thing. They don't care about the Constitution. In a real state, the Constitution is kind of the guardrails to help protect the citizens and their rights, right? And in Oregon, they use the Constitution as, and they have disdain for the Constitution. I mean, and as a matter of fact, so that's kind of where we're at. So the last part of this law is the measure 114 part of it, right? And so the measure 114, and this talks about where this thing goes into effect. And so obviously the most questions that I get the most often or is when is Measure 114 going to go into effect? And ultimately, where we're at currently is we have an active state case that's going to go in front of the Oregon State Supreme Court. I believe it's going to be in November 6th, I believe is when our attorney is going to be arguing in front of the Oregon State Supreme Court, and then they're going to have to issue a ruling after that argument. Okay, so I'm not sure how long that could take. Because I mean, obviously, the Oregon State Supreme Court has got to rule on the constitutionality of Measure 114. There was an appellate court ruling, and so that's what's important to note is this is completely separate than actual Measure 114 because the opinion that came out of the Oregon State Appellate Court is just that. It's just a rule. It's an opinion, and so it's not. It doesn't have any weight. It does not. It basically kicks this case up to the next higher court, which is the Oregon State Supreme Court. And so it does not have the power. Obviously, it's going to be viewed in front of the Oregon State Supreme Court, but it does not have the rule to pull the power to pull out that injunction that we have out of Harney County. And so that's the good thing that we have going for us. Okay. So when it talks about Measure 114, the Measure 114 part of this would not go into effect until after March 15th of 2026. That is if we get a ruling that does not go in our favor, right? So if the Oregon State Supreme Court says yes, it is constitutional, this part of the bill would go into effect on March 15th of 2026. So I feel that we're going to have some moves that we're going to be able to make, hopefully. And so, this is kind of the worst case scenario when it comes to Measure 114 or this part of Measure 114. And so just something to be aware of. Our magazine capacity has not changed. Obviously, Measure 114 is the law, but it's not enforceable right now. So that's something that people get kind of spun up on. It is the law technically because it was passed by the will of the people, but it's been held up in court. So technically it's law, but it's not, if that makes sense. So that's kind of where I'm at. I just want to give you guys kind of an update. This is kind of where it is. This is where Tina Kotek is going to be, signing this. And so this is when it passed, obviously May 29th. And so that's on the Senate was June 27th. So that's when it was, because they had the amendment. So they had to kind of ratify that. So just something to think about. Just want to give you guys an update, and I appreciate you guys tuning in. And if you guys have any questions, just please let me know. But just be aware, September 26th ish, around that time is when the rapid fire device ban is going to go into effect on Senate Bill 243. Also, there's going to be the restrictions on our public places, and so we have to be aware of that. And so there's actually, it's a Class A misdemeanor. So something to think about there. So nothing good for us, right? And there's no proof that law-abiding citizens carrying guns in public makes the public more dangerous. That's kind of contrary to that fact. So just want to give you that. Yeah, thanks, Jet. I appreciate you tuning in. And I just trying to do these updates, kind of see where we go on YouTube. I do a lot of stuff on Facebook, and so this is kind of a newer platform for me. I want to get into like more training, like advocacy work, activism, like showing people how to create content. Like it's like social media right now is a really great tool. And if you're not really familiar with how we clip and spin things to our advantage, I'd like to start doing some trainings on that as well. I want to use this channel to kind of educate and make sure that you guys are prepared for when we start up a new session, so I want to weaponize this platform to hopefully help us. Right. And so that's kind of the goal. So I'm going to get off for you guys. Have a great day. And I'll check in the next couple of days with another video. Maybe I'll put a poll out on seeing in the story, just kind of see what you guys want to see. We can do training on the other side, like how we decipher, Moms Demand Action in Everytown. They're already talking about national reciprocity. That's their one big push now. So something to be aware of there. They're very much watching what the Trump administration is doing, and they're trying to weaponize the local Moms Demand Action crowd to their advantage. So something to be aware of there. So if you're not signed up for their emails, I do recommend that you do go to their website and sign up for their emails. Put in dummy information. If you have like a backup, like a spam email address, probably give them that, and that way you can kind of see what they're doing, and then you can kind of go from there. And that's just something to think about. That's what I typically do. Is I have these dummy accounts. I make sure that I'm following them there, and then I get their information. That way, I can kind of stay ahead of it, kind of know where they're going. So yeah, I think I've seen that argument before, and I think there's a couple different. Yes, we have a Fourth and a Fifth Amendment, right? Especially when we're talking about affirmative defense. I could see that there's other parts of the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, that this would be a violation of, and obviously this would probably be a good argument. And so I feel that we're just gonna put more pressure on us to be involved and make sure that we're paying attention. So something to think about there. It's a mess. It really is. And so um, let's look at this. Why August 2nd? I guess. And what's that symbolize? That date? Give me a. I'm not familiar. So that yeah, I'm big on flag waves. I think what's important to note is to be careful because there's a lot of divisiveness right now, and so obviously be very very careful when you're in that situation because you don't want counter protests, and that's where things get a little spicy. So just be aware of that. I'd be curious to see what you're going to be doing at on August 2nd and see how we can support it. I think that we have to be active. We have to be vocal. We have to be let them know that obviously we do work hard. We do pay our taxes. We are not always available, but we're still paying attention. And that's the thing that we tried to do in the Oregon legislature this year is we tried to weaponize that to our advantage because we wanted to make sure that they knew that they could not do this without us being silent, or with us being silent. So I'm all for whatever we can do to make it look like we're still in this fight and we're not taking any time off. I think is a really, really good thing for us. And, obviously it helps with networking. We should be networking. We should be building our base. We should be finding common ground with others, right? That might not always necessarily agree with us. I think there's really, especially when it comes to our 2A rights, is there's a lot of common ground. And so that's where, what do we have in common and how we can use that to our advantage to push back on the radical fringe moms demand action type. So I think that's a really good thing. So build the base, network, and just make sure you stay up to date. So other than that, I'm gonna get off here. You guys have a great day and we will talk to you soon. Thank you.